Hey guys, so I already did the very first part of this. So if I hit Control Alt A, you're going to see as I zoom in that every part of this creature is outlined. And so after you go through the conceptualization stage where you come to the final here that we see, and you'll see in step one in the workshop that you'll see how the face changed, working out the body structure in addition to how the body structure works with the composition and all that kind of stuff. So those are things to think about. And so what we're going to be covering here in the workshop, and why I want to start here actually, is we're going to be working on the surface texture, the wet look to the skin. So you're going to have specular highlights, um, and all around, basically, what we're looking for is just a very nice and simple approach. Um, so let's choose two colors that will kind of complement the background, but then there's going to be color that's going to allow this creature to stand out and some lighting. So we're going to start off playing around with some purplish color, and let's try going the route of like a teal. I don't want to make them too light. So for the base color, you're just going to put, so I'm going to flatten all of these layers except for the bubbles. So the part that makes up the entire creature, I'm going to flatten all of that. All right. And then I'm going to copy it. Go back to here, paste. Let's do paste in place. So if you go here, you can go to paste, paste in place, or shift control V. All right, so that way you can put this up top, make a folder, and this will just be the broken up segments showing the process of the sketching, part of the sketching process for the creature design. So we get rid of this part here. So our gradient fill, and Control A. I'm going to darken up this portion and go a little saturated, more darker on that end. What I want to do is just play around real quick on the multiply layer. Just keep on trying to figure out like what works best. Going from dark to lights. Put this on screen. So try to figure out, does light work better on the bottom, or what works best with that. So as you're starting to figure this out, you kind of feel like, okay, well, you definitely want to light up the head. Then now you just see any other little discrepancies, areas that were missed. And let's just fill this area in here on the horn. Maybe take this one part back and just fill that in with the localized color. Okay. So here we have a very strong silhouette. It's also got a very nice composition because we're taking this part right here. Let's just go. We're taking this whole part here, and what we're doing is we're going from the, it's on multiply, that's why it's not showing up. So we go from this part here, go all the way down the body, and what you're basically doing is creating a swirl. So if I take this down on a darker part and continue that, I'm just going to keep on going around and around. So yeah, and eventually it's one of these things where your eye goes back to the starting point. So your eye will swirl around, so we can just get rid of all that. but your eye is going to swirl around the image, and once it reaches the tail, it's going to want to go back up to the head and kind of continue this area as it goes down into the hands and the foot there. Everything's swirling around towards the face. All right, so we're going to leave the drawing here for a little bit, but if you look at that again, that's the silhouette. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to just add in some highlights on the starting portion here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a default brush. So I'm going to take just a airbrush, but I'm going to apply a texture to it just to kind of break it up. So that might work. What we're doing with the texture is the texture is going to sort of be the opening or beginning of the skin. That looks kind of interesting. We want something that has enough breakup, but also still feels like a pattern of skin. So I was liking some of these other ones here. Let's see. We're looking for a wet skin tone type. This might work. So I'm going to scale it up a little bit for now. We're going to go to the lighter color, but then we're going to push to the extreme, and then we're going to lower the opacity on the brush. And then I'm just going to use this to light up certain portions that are closer to the viewer, areas that are, again, areas that are of importance that should be highlighted regardless of the lighting. That's sort of how I tend to play when I'm just designing. I want to show off the best parts of the design or get to a point and stuff. So where you're able to appreciate the creature design more than it being a painting. So what I want to do right now is basically take this airbrush and highlight areas that are eventually going to work its way into the wet skin and specular highlight look. That's the beginning of this whole stage here, is just working out the skin texture and a lot about the potential of wet skin portions, the way that would shine on the skin. So what we're looking for here is areas like the shoulder, areas like the thigh, where you have sort of the highest area, like the hip bone here, is hitting a point. And that's where light is hitting this sharp angle because it's wet and water is collecting light. So it's going to really push that element, that area of the design. So that's something else to think about just in general for the interest of your concept. So here I'm just working out the sort of ram skull and just quickly lighting up other areas. Not trying to focus too much on detail. Just trying to get this broken up just for the first portion of this. I'm going to lower the scale and do some quick fins. Can even just jump back, do some dark composing, and just work out part of the fin rail real quick here, just for lighting too. Like again, this area here, what you want to do is lighting, like something on a fin, just kind of take it straight down, and then you can kind of here and there it'll take it off like here, the base. So if I put this all the way, let's say a little higher, it's going to be kind of broken up because of the surface texture and the elements like the fish frills for the tail, like that kind of stuff. So we will kind of come back to these areas and refine them, but this is sort of a very quick basis into how you will start specular highlights and wet skin tone or skin texture. So this would sort of be like an amphibious type creature. It's got elements of like cephalopods, mammals, otters, um, areas here and stuff. The beak plays into the cephalopod, which was a cuttlefish. There we go. I knew I would get it. But I wasn't I'm trying to focus on the drawing and stuff and highlighting these areas that eventually are going to be very slick. But yeah, cuttlefish. I mean, there's even a little bit of bird design stuff going on. But as you can see, as I'm working with this, I'm highlighting. So I'm using this technique here to highlight and using my brush to add areas for potential specular highlight, just wet skin in general. So if we go back here, again to the tail, and then just areas that are going to pop. So you don't want to do it all over. You just want to add areas like this, and then make a really bright highlight. Work with the skin texture, the form as well. So what we're going to do for this part here now, just a very quick, say, atmospheric depth to a certain extent. So let's go back to, let's try, real quick now. All right, subtract actually is usually best. Let's try the invert there, maybe. All right. So what we want to do is, while we're still working on this layer here, okay, so that's now our color layer. We're just going to pinpoint and pick out areas that are of most importance real quick. Just going to do this. So we've got the eye down here, and a little bit of an eye guard. I'm going to add some very quick highlights. This is more about just making the concept clear. It's about clarity, about some of the skin texture, but for the most part, it's about the clarity of the concept. Okay. And then what we're going to do is the atmospheric depth, as I was talking about. So we're going to take a lighter, less saturated portion, and we're going to make sure it's selected. And let's get off the texture. Or let's rather go to the brush texture and increase the scale. Okay. So let's try this on a low opacity. And just push this back real quick. Not all of it. Most of the parts that are towards the edge or the end. Let's make it a little bluer. And then we can also go lighter too at this point. So that will get picked back up with some contrast, some shadows in there and stuff. Right now, I'm darkening it for the sake of breaking things up, pushing things back. I just don't want everything to look too similar. All right, so I want to bring now some of this purplish color, or more of a blue, up into the head. We'll find areas that we can do that in. Maybe these sort of decorative fin type flaps. And then make it very light. Make sure we're still in the blues. Let's try and maybe add one area here overall. And then back to the specular highlight. This is just sort of starting out the base of the specular highlight. So wrap that around. And let's push these back. Because it's on multiply, I need to go a little bit lighter. And then what I want to do here is a very bright sort of bounce light from the water, more or less, you know, whatever the environment is that this thing's in, and include that on this side of the face as we push this back also. So we're going to lighten this up with white, just pushing it back in space. Do the same thing here on the hand and the leg here as well. So this way you can see right away it's helping bring out areas like this leg and certain other areas that will allow you to read the form and the concept a little better. Bring some of that blue here. I'm going to kind of bring a little bit of that blue into a lot of different areas. It's kind of playing, again, part of the environment, but it works well with the color of the creature. You'll see too as we move along that this thing is eventually going to have some other colors that are going to help it pop and stand out, make it a little more interesting. But you don't want to stray too far from working with the environment because, you know, it really depends on what you're doing. But a lot of times the look of a creature is based on the environment. The colors are based on the environment. So if you look at sea life, yeah, you'll get a lot of color here and there, but a lot of times it's creatures, typically larger creatures, that will try and blend with their environment. So you look at like elephants, large whales, it's blue up top, white on the bottom. It's like sharks. That just helps them hide. So looking down below, it's darker, so the top is darker, and looking up above is lighter, so you get a white bottom. And that's just all for hunting and for safety from prey and predators and stuff like that. All right, okay, so let's maybe try and take a little more of this blue. Almost done with this portion. And it's just about there, at least, you know, to the part that we want to get it to. I tend to try and cover the entire creature in the starting process. Just makes things that much easier and stuff to try and balance out different areas and stuff later on. So I want this creature to definitely have a predatory vibe. So I'm sticking with some darker colors and stuff too. And then let's just jump into adding a little bit of green here and there. Just going to kind of work the green into some of the darker areas. And what that's going to do is kind of give it a break up in like your sort of green, blue, water, teal coloration, but also more like swampy maybe. And that kind of portion of things here. So just adding that more to the areas that are faded back. I'm going to lighten that just a little bit for that purpose as well. And you know, I'm kind of liking how this is working out with the green. So we're going to add that in as a portion of its main color. Work more green into the face here, and then the eye will be this kind of teal yellow. And then we'll end it off here until I pick up the next part of the video. I just want to erase this one little area just so the eye pops. All right. And there we go. That will end this portion. We do have the duplicate, so I could actually do this part here for you guys just to show real quick. So when you're cleaning up, you want to keep a lot of that pencil, at least I like to. You want to keep a lot of the pencil beneath certain areas. The edges are the areas that you kind of want to clean up. The areas where it's fading out, that's fine too. You can kind of clean up those edges pretty good. Here too at the leg. Just kind of making sure the outline, because when I outlined the creature itself, that's when I was cleaning up certain portions. Areas that are complex, like the horn, I want to be careful of. Let's lighten that area. And maybe get most of the mouth. Okay, so that will leave us off until the next portion. So I will then show you guys adding in different color, working on the texture of the skin, and focused more on the actual specular highlight and wet skin. All right. Okay, guys. So at this point, we have a relatively simple background. Again, it's more or less a vignette, giving you the notion or indication that this thing is underwater, also based on its pose and adding some of the bubbles and things like that. What I kind of wanted to give it actually is this glowing sort of violet vibe about it. I thought that would be kind of an interesting addition. So going back down to specular highlights, I'm going to grab my little custom brushes here because we're going to be working back and forth between some bright, but or rather some very saturated darks. So you have some very saturated darks, and then we're going to be using highlights, some very light colors, whites, even for the specular highlights to continue this, but also strengthening it. So let's first start off by defining some of the anatomy just a little further. And defining the anatomy actually plays a big role in how specular highlights and how that kind of a wet surface would reflect any sort of light. So I'm just trying to get it to a point where it feels very natural. The fact that it's underneath water. But I want to make sure that I am doing the limbs and the anatomy justice, in terms of making sure that they read well. I'm also trying to make sure that the bones and all that read correctly. So now I'm going to go to our lights, and this is where you start to get your specular highlights in certain areas. So there's highlights, which is sort of like a larger area, and a specular highlight. It's just exactly kind of how it sounds, speck, just a little speck. But it's an area of anatomy or a surface that will break up and bounce back light at a very strong point. So like the highest area here on the shoulder, give it a nice big sort of glowing effect. That's a specular highlight. So I'm going to use that, though, the lighting as well, to highlight areas like this, and then also the opposite by pushing some areas back further with the darker tone. You can even use them to kind of play off of some extra interest of design, or just the breakup of the skin itself. So you get this little portholes kind of happening on this here down here, as well as just wrinkly skin. And even if you do that too, if you want to wrinkle some skin down here and add specular highlights, again, all kind of running along the same route. That's where you're going to get your lightest and brightest highlights. You don't want to spend too much time on one spot. It's not really healthy for the piece, and cohesively it makes more sense if you work the other way around. So just keep jumping around, making sure that you are focused on a certain aspect, a certain task at hand that you're doing, you know, like this, for example, pushing back the limbs back in space, but still focusing now on adding a little bit of anatomy and breakup. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing here, because this one is forward more, but I'm still going to focus on adding some brighter highlights. So this is going to really kind of push the contrast. We're going to make this darker on the claws down here. So basically it's kind of almost the opposite. You're basically pushing the boundaries of, like, yeah, this is the brightest section. So you kind of want to put like real dark areas and real light areas and stuff. So the less contrast there is, like back here, that's going to still show you what you need to see, but it's not going to be the focal point. It's not really going to grab people's attention. Not the way that higher contrast would, like this part here. Okay, so I'm going to continue on down here to this part, because this is very much like sort of a, let's see, like the Japanese, what is it, hellbender, or any other sort of like a newt or salamander of any sorts. The skin that's kind of gives off a very wrinkly vibe. Almost looks like it would be ribs and stuff, but you know, when you look on it, you can kind of even just wave the skin a little bit for the shadows, break it up a little bit more. And some of the highlights like this, you know, they don't have to be a bright specular highlight. You can kind of just use that to break up the skin. So let's take some purple. Let's run that in here. Kind of liking how that was looking with the purple there. Let's do more wavy skin. Let's get these like airports and stuff like that. That's how they breathe usually. Is you get amphibians, and that's salamanders are part of it. They all breathe through their skin. So we get a lot of interesting little breakups for skin texture and for specular highlights. So I'm going to run this down this way again, focusing now fully on the specular highlights. And when I say fully, I just mean this is going to be the final outcome of the actual brightness of those highlights. So I had a little bit of breakup with the silhouette, as well as how it's pushed back in space. And just light these up a little bit, working with that light. So the light now is coming from here. I can use any of these really. So if I lower the opacity and just grab these colors and kind of use those to have light coming through these sort of spines or frills of almost like fish anatomy or even vertebrate anatomy. Okay, so now I want to go to pretty dark. Let's make sure how dark it is. And I'm just going to kind of go back over and do like coarse shadows. But I'm focused on doing this in a manner that is going to hopefully bring more attention to the focal point. And just help the overall piece stand out a little bit more regarding its attention in terms of like lighting. And then like the parts of interest of it and stuff. So let's push this back with a lighter color hitting the tops of those. I'll do it on this as well. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of this color and do a rim lighting. That's going to follow that down. So you'll get that too with like a wet effect, is that you'll get this sort of ring of light. Same thing as specular highlights, except for specular highlights are hitting just the tips, the highest points of form. And you'll see them here and there and stuff, but they're broken up more. If you just get your sort of typical highlight, it's going to just kind of run down and over a form like that. And you can use shadow to help sort of reinforce that, or to bring areas out and back and forth. So I'm going to kind of just lighten that part up. Let's darken back here a little bit. Again, still focus on the core shadow. It's almost done. Okay. And then I'm going to use the background again. So now we're going to lighten this area to a pretty certain amount, pretty decent amount here. Still want to use this white breakup effect that you can really help sort of define certain aspects of anatomy or the edge of an element. Just kind of helps it be an easier way to break it up without losing too much, like having to do this here, like throwing it back too much into atmospheric depth. Okay, so this is getting to a point now where if I switch over to this white and we go almost all the way, yeah, so once you start to add these extreme highlights, you know, again, you're following this path where the light will go. So that path is it's following the form. So the way that you've got light, let's see here. All right, that's because we're still focused on this here. So the way that you have light going down this way or on an angle is coming from this side, something like that, or you know, whatever direction light is coming from, you're going to have that directional flow along it here, as I was just shown. So that's how the light is going to bounce off of and break up this form. And then I'm going to use areas like this here to, you know, some of this stuff is, I don't want to say creative leeway, but there are ways for an artist to make it seem easier to sort of read an element. It's kind of, you want to say like, oh, it's a cheat, which it is. It's like you can cheat reality, cheat how something really should look in order to have it make more sense for your purposes. You know, whether it's a creature or whatever the deal is. Okay, so right now I'm going to just focus more with darks and how the highlights for the specular portions read. But I do want to take a quick step back and just take a look at how this thing reads as a whole. We've got to go down here and add some specular highlights, but let's darken this area up. I want to see something. Just so let's get rid of that. Right now, you can see the details of what we've added. Do a new layer, and I'm going to do multiply. So I'm going kind of low here. Let's switch over to a little bit more purple, and we'll go up to about that for the multiply. Well, maybe a little more because I'm on a lower level. All right, so now I want to, yeah, there we go. I want to kind of throw a little bit more of this back in shadow. Push the contrast areas a little further. Get your shadows for like planes and form development, and distinguish those different areas instead of break them up. Okay, so let's see. I'll just push this one back in space. That's right, we're on multiply. Let's go to a new layer real quick. Just want to see if I push that lower jaw back a little further, how that might actually look. I think if I maybe give this tentacle here a better sort of rim light or break up from the background, that'll probably do it. So yeah, I think that's fine. All right. So now we're coming down to the part where it's like towards the end here. Again, just kind of using this lighting rim effect to kind of separate areas that seem to be like of importance or an area and stuff that helps it make, it just helps it make more sense. Makes it a little easier to read. All right, so I think we're there. And then what I'm gonna do is back this out. And from here, you're just going to continue on. We're going to work with these specular highlights down into the tail, but you want to make sure that you're not adding too much complexity, you know, compared to the body and especially the head. And this will work a little more on the values and specular highlights and things like that. Maybe even some different color to kind of help bring that out so that this remains the focal point. It's the most complex, most interesting part of it. But again, the tail, we're going to work on the specular highlights down that way for the end game, the ending portion, which you'll see in the last step.